Hello, this is Dr. Robert Barney. During this session, I'm going to be showing you how to create a paper that has been formatted according to the 7th edition of the APA Publication Manual. I'm going to be showing you how to create this paper in the 2016 edition of Microsoft Word. One of the first things that you need to do when you open up Microsoft Word is make sure that we set the font to an APA approved style and size. Now the APA manual gives us a couple of different font styles and sizes that we can choose from. These include Arial 11, Calibri 11, Lucia Sans Unicode 10, Times New Roman 12, Georgia 11, and Computer Modern 10. You need to make sure that when you choose one of these, you stick with it. You can't go back and forth between Calibri 11 and Times New Roman 12. One of the first things that you can do is select your font here in the font dialog box, and you can also use the option to choose which font that you want to set as your default, and you would just indicate that here. You can also do the same thing with paragraph spacing. On my computer, what is shown is that the paragraph default spacing is set to single, but I'd like to have that set as double. So I'm going to set that as my default. I will indicate OK. Once I have set my font size and style, the first thing that I need to do is develop my title page. Now the title page for a professional paper looks different from the title page of a student paper. APA formatting has two different sets of requirements for those paper types. I'm going to start by going over the expectations of the professional paper. In a professional paper, one of the first things that we need to do is include a running head. So I'm going to go to the Insert tab, and I'm going to select Header and blank. The header needs to be 50 characters or less. In most cases, you can just include the title of your paper. However, if the title of your paper is more than 50 characters, including spaces as well as punctuation, then you need to shorten that title in the running head. After including the running head, what I need to do is include page numbers in the top right-hand corner of the header. The way I do that is I'm going to click the tab button twice to move the cursor over to the far right-hand corner of the header, and I'll choose current position, plain number. And now I have my running head in the top left corner of the document and the page numbers in the top right corner of the document. I can go ahead and close my header and footer now. After I've included my running head and my page number, I need to include the title of my paper on the title page. The title of the paper needs to be 3 to 4 spaces down from the header section of the paper. The title needs to be bold and it needs to be centered. There needs to be an extra space placed between the title of the paper and the names of the authors of the paper. If I was the only author of the paper, I would just include the author's name as well as affiliation, which includes the department that an individual works in and the name of their institution. If there is more than one author in a paper, this needs to be indicated. This is an example of what it would look like if you had two authors from the same institution and department. However, if you were to add in another author that was from a different institution, it would look slightly different. You would need to make sure to include information about where this individual comes from or what their institutional affiliation looks like. In this case, let's say that this individual didn't have an institutional affiliation. The APA manual requires that the individual's location be identified or where they reside. However, one of the confusing things that you'll notice is that we can't tell where specific authors come from. So the APA manual requires that we use superscripts. A superscript is just a smaller case of a number. I'm just highlighting the numbers and I am changing them to a superscript. And I'll do the same thing in front of my institution. What this indicates is that Robert J. Barney and Maya A. Lewis are affiliated with the School of Social and Behavioral Sciences from Stockton University. And Lorato Barney is at Cherry Hill, New Jersey in the United States. After the title of my paper, the authors, and the author affiliations have been provided, I can include what's known as an author note. This is included down towards the bottom of the page. The author note needs to be centered and bold, while the notes themselves should not be. They need to be flush to the left with first line indentation. Now, the author's notes include 4 separate paragraphs. Not each of these paragraphs are required to be included in the author notes section. If there's something that's not relevant, it can be left out. The author note paragraphs are very clearly identified by the APA manual. In paragraph 1, an author is expected to include ORCID IDs for each of the authors. In paragraph 2, the author can note any change of affiliation for any of the authors. In paragraph 3, the author can indicate any disclosures or acknowledgments. In paragraph number 4, the author can indicate contact information. So in this case, I'm going to say that I'm not going to include paragraphs 1 and 2, but I'll instead just include paragraphs 3 and 4. So for paragraph 3, I might want to write something like the following. Paragraph 4 would likewise need to have first line indentation with double spacing. And that is what the author's note will look like. After this, I can include a page break. The title page for the student paper looks different from the title page of the professional paper. First off, the author's note should not be included on the student paper. The student paper should also have a couple of additional pieces of information. So let's say that our student, in this case, is going to be Jane Doe, and they are in fact affiliated with the School of Social and Behavioral Sciences from Stockton University. We would also need to make sure that we include the course number for the student. We need to include the name of the professor. And we also need to include the date. This is all the information that needs to be included on the title page of the student version of a paper. What we need to do at the end of the information in our title page is include a page break. The next page after the title page in a professional paper is going to be the abstract. I'm going to include it here just to help demonstrate what this would look like. In some cases, if you're a student, your instructor may require you to include an abstract, but if they don't require it, then you can just leave it out. The abstract page needs to begin with the title Abstract. This title needs to be centered and bold. After the title Abstract has been included, we can move the cursor to flush left. There should not be first line indentation with the abstract, and additionally, the abstract should be 250 words or less, summarizing the information included in the paper. After we've written the abstract, you could also include a set of keywords that are included or associated with the paper. Keywords should be on a separate line after the abstract paragraph, and the keywords should have first line indentation and should be provided, the word keywords should be in italics. 3 to 5 keywords can be included. Just providing you with a few examples of what this might look like on an abstract page. And what I'm also going to do here is provide an additional page break, because on the abstract page, the only thing that should be included is the abstract itself and keywords. Body of the paper starts on page 3 of the professional paper, and in most cases on page 2 of the student paper. Good papers include structure, and structure often requires use of headings and subheadings. APA formatting gives us 5 levels of heading that we can actually utilize to help build our paper. I'm going to walk you through 2 or 3 of these different levels of headings just to give you an idea of how you can build these into your paper and use them to help structure and organize your thoughts. The example that I'm going to be giving actually relates to a research paper, but I think this will help to illustrate things very clearly for most people. So what I'm going to do is scroll down a little bit. The first level of heading in a paper is bold and centered. Bold and centered with no first line indentation. So I'm turning off first line indentation. And the first level of heading that needs to be included at the beginning of the body of your paper needs to be a restatement of the title of your paper. It should be centered and bold. Now let's just say that I wanted to organize my paper in the following way. I wanted to have an introduction, which includes a couple of different subsections. We'll include a problem statement, literature review, and a set of research questions. This represents level of heading number 2, and this needs to be bold and flush left. Now what I can do is include heading number 2, and I could indicate that this becomes my default by selecting update heading of 2 or heading 2 to match selection. And I could say that these are going to be level of heading 3, the problem statement, the literature review, and research questions. So they need to be bold and italics according to APA formatting. And I am going to indicate that this is level of heading 3, and I'm going to update heading 3 to match this selection. Now I can indicate this is level of heading 3, as is this. And that is section number 1 with 3 subsections. My next heading can be methods, which includes sample, research design, data collection, and instruments. And what I can do is, since I know this is heading level 2, I just select this and it'll create the level of heading for me. And this is heading level 3. I can include a couple of additional sections such as a results section, discussion section, and a limitations section. And I could indicate that each one of these represents their own section using heading number 2. Now that I have clearly organized the paper, identifying sections and subsections, and identified the headings for each of those sections and subsections, I can begin writing the body of my paper. Now what typically happens here is you just decide where you're going to include information. So I may begin under the subsection problem statement. Under the problem statement, I need to make sure that I am using first line indentation and double spacing. And here I would write an actual paragraph. And basically when you are writing your paragraphs, you will include them under the different sections and subsections of the paper in the same way. And this is what a typical paper will look like in terms of the headings and format for the body of the paper. Now, after the body of the paper has been written, the researcher needs to include a page break. And the page break will move the paper from the body of the paper over to the reference list. The references need to stand alone as their own page. They need to begin on a new sheet, which is why we add the page break. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the title to the references page, which is heading level number 1. And I'm realizing now that we didn't actually set this as the default, so I'm doing that now. So what I'm going to do now is insert a set of references into this paper that I'd already written in another document. So this is what my references look like. I don't have time in this video to show you how to create and properly format references in APA format. What I will tell you though is that I have produced another video entitled References in 7th edition APA format if you need a little more assistance with putting together that reference list. But some key items that I'm going to highlight for you in relation to our paper here. First off, your references have to be double spaced. Okay, if they're not already, you can do this through the paragraph function. And here you'll see the line spacing is already double. But we also have to make sure that we have hanging indentation for our references. And this is what it looks like. All right, so the reference list has to be hanging indentation, whereas in other places in the document, it's either flush left or first line indentation. After we've created our reference list, then the next thing that we need to do is insert a page break. 7th edition APA formatting does not require the researcher to include an appendix. However, APA formatting does allow for an appendix to be included after the reference list. Appendices are very helpful when you want to include additional information with your paper that's not appropriate to place in the actual body of the paper. Examples of this might include things like some tables, graphs, perhaps a copy of the survey that you have included in your research study, and the list goes on from there. Now, the first thing I want to point out is that the appendix needs to be at the first level of heading. So on the first line, you're just including the word appendix. After your title, though, which is appendix, you need to make sure that you are including a label. And the label is really just the title of your appendix. This should also be at heading level 1. So here, I'm just going to type in title of the appendix. but it all really just depends on what it is that you're including. So if it was a copy of a survey, you would write the title of the actual survey itself. Now, as I've mentioned before, it is appropriate to include tables, graphs, paragraphs, all those types of things as part of the appendix. But you need to make sure that if you are writing paragraphs, that your paragraph is flush left. So we do not have first line indentation. So that's what an appendix will typically look like in the body of a paper. Now, it is possible as well to have more than one appendix. So if you have multiple scales or multiple sets of figures and graphs that you would like to include, you can do that. However, when you start using multiple appendices, you need to make sure to label them A, B, C, D, and so on. So here we've included Appendix A, and we are going to go ahead and add an Appendix B. So before we get to our next appendix, one thing that we need to do is insert a page break. And then I'm going to paste the copied appendix, and this becomes Appendix B. And the title of your appendix would change based upon what it is that you've included here as well. So just as a last step, what we're going to do is we are going to take a look at the overall paper and what we have created. So on the first page, you'll see our title page written in student format as our final example. We have an abstract page, which is included on page number 2. We have the body of our paper, and the body of our paper actually has 3 levels of heading that we're using. After the body of our paper, we have our reference list. After our reference list, we have Appendix A, and we have included Appendix B as well. This brings us to the end of our session about how to create a paper outline in 7th edition APA format.